Today's meditation is a musical one led by Robert Wetzel, from San Diego. I wanted to tell you at this time that he's donating a concert tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock in the plaza in the beautiful old chapel, Capilla del Rosario, and the public's invited. Robert.
Good morning. I'm going to play for the meditation a piece by Manuel Ponce, one of the famous Mexican composers of the 20th century, Manuel Ponce. And this is the second movement from his sonata, number 3, and the piece is entitled Chanson, or Song. It's a very serene kind of composition, so I would suggest perhaps to forget about all your worries, if you have any, and just maybe close your eyes and just feel the peace that the music will bring for you, and feel the love. Maybe think of a loved one at the same time that your eyes are closed.
Our presenter today is Pete Soderman, talking about smart recovery. Smart Recovery is an evidence-based program that has been restoring addicts to normal lifestyles since 1994, with over 300 face-to-face and online meetings all over the world. Pete Soderman moved here with his wife, Gethin, in May of 2010, and is currently writing a book concerning addiction and recovery called Powerless No Longer. He's a certified facilitator for SMART recovery, Smart Recovery, has been involved with the organization for many years and is starting a meeting here at Riverside. Pete?
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Pete Soderman. I gotta check that every now and then just to make sure. When I work in the library on Thursdays, they give me a name badge that I've got written upside down so I can flip it up and remember what my name is. Some days it's pretty hard. This is my third time presenting at Open Circle. Jim has been kind enough to let me come back and do this. The first time I presented, I talked about neuroplasticity, or the ability of our brains to remold themselves dynamically as a result of things that occur in our lives, our environment, and the learning process. Second time, I gave a talk on rational motive behavior therapy, or REBT, specifically geared to relieving stress and pain for an aging population by changing some of our irrational beliefs about things that go on. Today, I'm going to focus on addiction and recovery with specific emphasis on smart recovery, SMART, because I'm starting a SMART meeting here this coming Wednesday right there in the Sala. It's a free group, by the way. There's no charge for attendance, so I'm not out here begging for money today. We do pass the hat, however, because LCS charges us for rent for the facility, and the facilitator isn't going to pick that up forever. Today, I'm going to take a look at a reality-based look at some characteristics of addiction. The reason I call it a reality-based look is there have been thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of studies on addiction. And there are many popular myths about addiction. And when you start studying the studies and what they say, you find out that what you know or thought you know about addiction simply isn't true. Secondly, I'm going to look at what the studies say actually work for addiction and recovery. Now, I'm going to talk about what is smart recovery, what is a smart meeting like, and finally, what happens next. I'm not here this morning to denigrate any other recovery modalities or groups. One thing one finds after really making a study of the field is that no single method or modality works for everything or works for everyone all the time. There are as many paths to recovery for addicts as there are addicts who have successfully recovered. What you find if you look at the data is that most people find their own way, taking what works from here and what works from there. There are, however, some pervasive myths about addiction that float around from time to time, and mainly they're things that were believed to be true at one time, and now we know through 50 years of studies that they're not true. The most pervasive, and the reason I'm going here is because I have to lay an evidentiary foundation for the group I'm here to talk about. the most pervasive and the one that causes the most trouble, not only for addicts, but also for people who work in the field, is the idea that an addict is powerless over their addiction and cannot recover without help. This is an idea that's been around for a long, long time, and not only is there no evidentiary support for it, there are thousands and thousands of studies that say that that's absolutely not true. If you look at the data, what it tells you is that over time, 75% of all addicts to all substances and behaviors recover on their own or with very minimal help. On their own or with very minimal help. And it used to be believed at one time that this was not true. One of the earliest studies that started to point this out was one that was done after the Vietnam War. The Nixon administration was extremely concerned because of the availability of opiates in the Far East, that many servicemen were going to come home addicted to heroin and other opiates. It was believed at the time that if a person tried heroin, they would instantly become addicted, and once addicted, could never recover without a great deal of pain and effort. So of the 500,000 men that we had in Vietnam, how are we going to deal with 100,000, 200, 300,000 addicts coming back all at once? It's a serious problem, so they did a large study. What they found was that indeed half of the enlisted men who served in Vietnam used opiates at one time or another. 34% of the returning veterans used heroin at one time or other. 20% met the criteria for addiction. 24%, or 20%. After 3 years, they continued the study, after 3 years, 80% of those who had come back addicted were no longer using drugs. Only 6% of them ever went to any form of drug abuse treatment, including self-help groups. They followed these gentlemen for 25 years. Well, I shouldn't just say gentlemen, it was men and women, for 25 years. And what they found was an overall recovery rate of 70 to 80% without help. There was a huge study done in the United States in 2005 that involved 43,000 adults. It was called NESARC, N-E-S-A-R-C, 4,500 of which were substance dependent. Only 25% of them had ever sought help. 73% of them recovered on their own. There are thousands and thousands of studies that point out the same data. Roughly 70 to 80% of all addicts recover on their own without help. Every study that's ever been done has pointed to that. And many of the studies, surprisingly enough, many of the studies show that a significant proportion of former addicts are able to return to moderate use of the substance. This is especially true of alcoholics. Many of them are able to return to moderate use. In other words, they can use the substance and no longer meet the DSM requirements, the statistical, the manual from the American Psychiatric Association. They're no longer addicts. There are 4 points the studies show that are common to all of the people who successfully recovered on their own and people who recover by any method. there's 4 things that they basically have to do. 4 areas. The first is motivation. The addict must come to a decision that using is no longer worth it. In the case of the Vietnam veterans, the biggest reason that most of them were able to self-remit is their stress was gone. They were no longer in the situation they were in before. Without the stress gone, it wasn't worth it to them to continue to use heroin or other drugs. Motivation is the key to recovery. You got to reach that point where it's not worth it anymore. With proper motivation, almost any program or method will work. Without proper motivation, almost nothing will. The second point coming off any addictive substance, from nicotine to heroin, there are urges. All addicts get urges to use in certain circumstances. These urges or cravings have to be dealt with, which starts with knowing about them, expecting them, and then dealing with them. But the successful addict has to have some method of dealing with them. Also must have some method of dealing with problems. What I mean by this, problem solving, is the emotional upsets that happen during an addict's day that bring forth triggers to use. You have a bad day at work, and this, that, and the other, your self-esteem goes down the tubes, so you decide to stop and have a drink on the way home, your head tells you, I can just have one, but unfortunately you never had one in your life, so the addict has to come up with some method of dealing with those problems. And the fourth thing, to make it short, call it focus. Addicts tend to focus on short-term gratification. Nothing but what's going to happen in the next few minutes or hours or whatever. Adults, healthy adults, focus some on short-term gratification and some on achievement of long-term goals. And that's what the addict must learn to do. There's another term for that. It's called growing up, which is something that many addicts simply are not capable of doing without some work. And what we're talking about here is a complete change, obviously, in lifestyle and the way the addict views the world. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, it's a group inside the Department of Health and Human Services, does a large survey every year looking at addiction. The numbers for 2010, which is the last year that data is available, indicate that 22 million Americans abuse or are dependent upon drugs. Okay, and I include alcohol in that. 18 million of that 22 million, or 80%, are addicted to alcohol. Some are addicted to alcohol and other substances, but 80% are addicted to alcohol. Addiction has two components, a physical component and a learned component. The physical component involves chemical biological changes in the brain of the addict that are in some cases irreversible. Now these chemical and biological changes that take place are different depending upon the drug. Okay, nicotine affects our brains differently than alcohol does, which is different than what cocaine does, and so on and so forth. The other component, the learned component, is remarkably similar between substances. An alcoholic looks at life and deals with things basically the same way that a cocaine addict does, or a almost any other addict. The learned components are virtually the same among all addictive behaviors. Fortunately for addicts like myself, we can recover from our addictions addressing only the learned component. There's not much we can do. There are some drugs that have been developed that work for some people, but there's not much that we can do as individuals to change that chemistry and biology. What we can change, however, are our own reactions, our own beliefs, and our own view of the world. Psychologists at the University of New Mexico, led by Dr. William Miller, tabulated every controlled study of addiction treatment they could find. They weighted each study based upon the quality of its research methodology to arrive at a comprehensive list of what works. They first published this in book form in 1995 and continued to update it ever since. The latest was out in 2009. The book is called The Handbook of Alcoholism Treatment Approaches, Effective Alternatives. What I'm going to do this morning is very quickly go through the top 10 modalities of what works according to the evidence. Some of these might surprise you. The number one thing that works, the most effective thing against all forms of addiction, is a brief intervention. Discussion with a trusted medical person or someone who points out what's going on. I quit smoking that way. My cardiologist looked me straight in the eye as she was releasing me from the hospital after a heart attack, and she said, "You know, Pete, if you start smoking again after you leave here, your chances of having another heart attack are 4 times greater than if you do not. And by the way, your next heart attack will kill you." I haven't had a cigarette since. Okay? In my case, that brief intervention was enough. And for the 75% of addicts who quit on their own, that brief intervention is enough to kick off, whatever's necessary. The second most effective modality is a program called motivational enhancement. This intervention is usually brief and consists of a thorough drug assessment, risk factors, family history, drug-related problems, level of dependence, and motivation. The key to this approach is that it helps you see the good things and the bad things about your addiction and help you resolve any ambivalence you might have over changing your behavior. It addresses point 1. The next most successful modality is something called community reinforcement, or CRA. It's a treatment approach that works by eliminating positive reinforcement for using and enhances reinforcement for sobriety. It integrates several treatment components, including building motivation to quit, analyzing using patterns, increasing positive reinforcement, and teaching new coping skills. Involves significant others in the recovery process. It shares a lot of components with motivation. It just adds urge control. The fourth most successful modality is self-help manuals. I'm writing one. They're all over the place. Some advocate this, some advocate that. Mine is going to be obviously pretty much evidence-based. It's not going to be strictly along the lines of smart recovery. But a lot of the people who've recovered on their own use self-help manuals to do that. The next is behavioral self-control training. It's a behavioral program that's based on the learning model of addiction that I presented in my first talk here. I'm not going to go into it now, rather than the disease model. Behavioral self-control training can be used by either those who wish to abstain or those who wish to moderate their behavior, because moderation is possible for some people. The evidence says it is. It mainly consists of cognitive behavioral techniques. It can be self-taught or used in conjunction with other programs. The next is behavior contracting. It's usually used by therapists, involves the addict making one or a series of written contracts concerning their behavior goals. Then you have social skills training. It uses a cognitive behavioral approach to change the behavior patterns of addicts, especially in the area of getting along with the rest of the world. It's kind of a kindergarten for addicts. Kind of socializes and teaches them how to work with other people. Then behavioral marital therapy, which is geared to married couples, obviously, involves a contract not to use, and it's based on the theory that reducing relationship tension reduces the risk of relapse. The ninth is case management, which is not really a therapy. It's defined as a set of interventions aiming to facilitate positive treatment outcomes. It's kind of like a social worker for addicts. Take a look at an individual case and, well, what does this person need from the community, from the medical community and the social community, and what else? What does this addict need? And then helps them find it. And the 10th most successful modality is cognitive therapy. It's a large catch-all category that includes cognitive behavioral therapy, rational emotive behavior therapy, and several others. Many of the programs and methodologies I've already mentioned use cognitive therapies as part of their technique. This category looks at cognitive therapy alone and not in conjunction with other methodologies. If you look at these programs, the most successful programs known according to the evidence for helping addicts recover, each one of these programs addresses one or more of these 4 points. Addresses one or more of the 4 points. What if there was a program that included the best parts of all the modalities I've just talked about? What if there was a program that looked at the science, okay, what works, and combined those modalities and put them all in one place? That's exactly what Smart Recovery does. And why, when I saw the program 6 or 7 years ago, I jumped on it, because it mirrored what I had already been doing, myself and some friends of mine. SMART, which stands for Self-Management and Recovery Training, started in 1994 by a group of individuals who wanted to create a recovery environment that used evidence-based scientific tools that were indicated by the latest research. SMART is a program that constantly evolves as the science evolves, so that it always reflects the latest in recovery techniques. A perfect example of that is There is something that is being added to the SMART program as I speak and coming out in the next SMART handbook. There's a lot of evidentiary support these days for the inclusion of some sort of meditation training because it facilitates positive outcomes. So I've done meditation for years and been very pleased to find out that it's being added to the SMART program. SMART's purpose is to support individuals who have chosen to abstain or considering abstinence from any type of addictive behaviors and substances or activities such as gambling, sex behavior, eating, spending, etc. We teach how to change self-defeating thinking, emotions, and actions, and to work towards long-term satisfaction and quality of life. Our approach is to teach self-empowerment and self-reliance. We encourage individuals to recover and live satisfying lives. We teach the tools for making self-directed change, and I'll talk about a few of the tools in a moment. The meetings are educational and include open discussion. And by open discussion, I mean open discussion. We not only allow, we encourage crosstalk in the meetings. SMART is a secular program. We neither encourage nor discourage religious or spiritual beliefs. Religious or spiritual proselytizing has no place within the program. SMART can serve as a primary or supplementary recovery program. Everyone is welcome. It's up to each individual to determine his or her own path. SMART has no problem. I have no problem with people coming to SMART recovery, as I just said, as a second or third modality. There are lots of people who recover. They go to 12-step, they go to SMART, they use a therapist, so on and so on. That's absolutely fine. Everybody's got to find their own path, and we have no problem with that. SMART is a 4-point program. The first, enhance and maintain motivation. We have many tools that will help the addict do that. Coping with urges, I've already mentioned that. Managing thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, or problem solving. How does an addict deal with what's going on in his or her day-to-day activities? And lastly, developing a healthy and balanced lifestyle, prioritizing short and long-term goals. Sounds trivial, adults have been doing that for years and years. It's just, I look back and how hard that was for me when I was using myself. And some of the tools we use. A few weeks ago, a friend of mine, Bob Branson, gave a presentation here on the Prochaska and DiClemente stages of change model. That's an important tool in SMART because it's important for the addict to know where they are, where they're going, kind of a roadmap to personal change, not just addiction, any form of personal change. And as Bob mentioned in his talk, it's very, very important that an addict not jump into the action phase and actually start doing things without some proper preparation, because the fact that an addict is going to make a change affects not only him, it affects the entire world around him. Well, you have to stop and look at that and how we get to deal with this and that and the other. Cost-benefit analysis. This is another tool that Bob went into, and I talked about it in my first talk. Cost-benefit analysis, or CBA, that's when you look at the pros and cons of an activity. Doing it, not doing it, pros and cons, short-term and long-term. We actually fill these out sometimes for newcomers at Smart Meetings, and if it's done properly, you realize that there are absolutely no long-term pros for using, period. Okay, there just are not. All the benefits of using are short-term. And the pros for not using are short and long-term. And seeing that in front of you can be quite a powerful experience. Another one we use is the change plan worksheet. This is an actual worksheet in our handbook that the addict fills out. And, hey, here's where I am now. Here's where I want to be in a month, 6 months, a year. How am I going to get there? And of course, that's an ongoing, updating thing. But you need a plan. You need to know where you are, and you need to know where you're going. Role-playing and rehearsal. A recovering addict, especially a new recovering addict, is going to face situations that are new to them. And they're going to face some old situations that are triggers for using. How does the addict deal with that? It's not always intuitive for somebody who's just coming out of it. But we do role-playing at meetings. We play different parts and go through scenarios that are troubling to people and come up with a good way of handling a situation. And of course, REBT, Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, is the core of the SMART program. It's used for both urge control and emotional upsets. And it's a tool with a very long name, but it's a very simple concept. Destructive images and self-talk awareness and refusal method, or disarm. And what this is, it's to address that voice in the addict's head. Sometimes it's a committee, but it's always at least one voice that rationalizes and justifies and points the addict toward using behavior. If you make it mad enough, okay, it says things like, I need it, get it for me now. If you don't, we could die. By the way, you deserve it. It's dealing with that voice, okay, which can absolutely demolish an addict's cognitive defenses in some cases if he doesn't have the proper tools. That's what disarm is. First, you give the voice a name. If you call it George or something, or the Beast, or Harry, or, give it a name. Then you can deal with it. Makes it easier. And you can talk to it. You can argue with it. You can dispute it. USA, or unconditional self-acceptance, is one of our most important tools through all the 4 points. And it deals with a couple of things. Most importantly, the language we use towards ourselves is very, very important. We are what we tell ourselves we are. To many addicts, self-esteem is a variable. It goes up and down depending on, what's going on in the outside world. Self-esteem is not a variable. Should not be a variable. And that's one of the most important points that we try to get across. And one of the tools we use for that is the language we use in ourselves. We don't call ourselves addicts or alcoholics or potheads or cokeheads or anything else at the meeting. My name is Pete, and I'm a carbon-based life form. And that's about the most identification you'll get out of me. I know who I am. Okay. Then brainstorming. We go over techniques, discuss them amongst ourselves for situations that come up. Because nothing is intuitive to an addict who's just trying to recover or just getting into the basics. The first time I had to make a sales trip was about 3 weeks after I stopped drinking. And here I'm going to go to Fort Lauderdale with a whole bunch of drinking buddies, about 30. and we'd meet in the bar at 5 o'clock or 5:30 and go out, have a bunch of drinks, and go out to dinner and have some more drinks and so on. How was I going to avoid that? I didn't have a clue. Talked to some friends of mine, and somebody suggested, geez, Pete, why don't you just stay in a different hotel? Yeah, gee, that never occurred to me, okay? Never occurred to me. I called my boss, yeah, sure, fine, stay down by the beach, I don't care. Just go to the sessions and take off, which is what I did. Okay, I removed myself from that. And you know what? Not one of those guys that I used to drink with and drank with for years, not one of them asked me the first morning after we were all there where I was the night before. Nobody noticed I was even gone. I mean, what a wake-up call. What is a smart meeting like? Okay, what goes on in a smart meeting? Starts with a welcoming and opening statement by the facilitator, who we are, what we do, very brief. Then a check-in, individually, starting with the facilitator again. What was your week like? So on and so forth. You go around the room to everybody. Then a short period of agenda setting, where the group decides, the facilitator decides what we're going to address. Who's having the biggest problems, who has needs in that particular meeting, and that's what we do. Once we set the agenda, we go into the working part of the meeting, coping with the activating events that people are facing. After that is donations. The hat gets passed because we do have rent there. Then a checkout, a meeting review, and goal setting and plans for the week. Okay, what's your plan for this week? What are you going to do to accomplish that? We go around the room again. Then socializing, exchange phone numbers, just general chatting, and it's done. The meeting is highly interactive. We challenge ideas, not people. Okay. And there's no moping in the back of the room in a smart meeting. You can't come, late to the meeting, sit in the back of the room, say nothing to nobody, and sneak out before the meeting ends. You can't do that at a smart meeting. I don't care if you come and sit and don't say anything, that's fine. But you don't get to mope and not be addressed. We have other resources, smartrecovery.org is our international website. Every single tool and resource that we have available is downloadable from our website, bar none. We have online meetings up there that run many hours through the day and night. You can almost always find somebody to chat with on the website. We have local resources. We have the Smart Handbook. And of course, I had a logistical problem getting that, but I taken care of that. What happens next? What happens next? Most people stay in smart recovery. It's been my experience and the experience of other facilitators. Most people stay in smart recovery for 9 to 18 months. Long enough to embed the principles and go on with their lives. This is not a program that requires a lifetime of meetings. It's something that you address, you make a change in your life, and you go on with it. Because why did you do all that hard work in the first place? Some people do stick around to become facilitators and either start new meetings or share the load in the same meeting that they came in on, which is fine. People get sick, they go on vacation, so on and so forth. And that's what I have this morning. The first SMART meeting will be right there this coming Wednesday at 3 p.m. And it's free. Anybody wants to check us out, come ahead. I have some brochures over here, and Jim was kind enough to make a sign-up sheet. If anybody wants some more information or get a hold of me, you can go on the sign-up sheet back by the tree. And that's it. I thank you for your attention, and have a good day.
I'm sure some of our audience may have some questions for you, and I may have the first one. When is your book going to be out?
Goodness knows. I've been working on it for quite a while now, and I keep getting sidetracked on other things, like starting a smart meeting. And all I can say is it's a work in progress.
Well, good. It's something to look forward to. If you have questions for Pete, raise your hand and somebody will bring you the mic. And there's one in the back there. And
I agree with you as far as the smart approach goes in taking care of addictions. Isn't your biggest deterrent or a negative feeling on that coming from the medical community who insists that it's a disease? And even trying to say that you have genes that you either develop or have to negate the whole smart approach?
Okay, that's a good question. In the first place, if that were indeed true, well, there is a genetic component to addiction. No question, there is. There are also chemical and biological changes that take place in the brain. That's also true. If the smart approach didn't work, if those 10 modalities that I mentioned didn't work, there would be no evidence for them. And there's tons and tons and tons of evidence for them. Bottom line is it doesn't matter as far as SMART is concerned, and we take no position on whether or not addiction is a disease. It just doesn't matter in our approach. The tools work. Okay, 75% of addicts recover on their own, and that just wouldn't be possible if it was impossible to recover. I mean, how many, I'm sure everybody here knows someone, if you haven't done it yourself, who has quit smoking without pills, patches, programs, or anything else. I did. Thousands of people, millions of people have, according to the National Cancer Society, American Cancer Society. Between 85 and 90% of people who quit smoking quit on their own, and it's the most pernicious addiction there is. It wends its way into every form of our life. Quitting smoking for me was much harder than getting off the booze. It's an addiction like any other, and we simply don't care if it's a disease or not. The tools apply, and they work, and there's evidence that they work. Thank you.
Arlene.
I have two questions. The first one is, you talked about people being able to go to different types of support groups, and I wondered how a person would deal with going to Smart Recovery and something like AA. So they come to Smart Recovery and they say they're not powerless over alcohol. They go to their alcoholics meeting and say they are powerless over. So they're two opposite things they would say.
Okay, that sounds like a big contradiction, and I understand that. It's a good question. Most of the people who use multiple paths like that are taking what they need from each, okay? And from Alcoholics Anonymous, people would take the fellowship, which is very powerful, okay? When I first got sober, there was no SMART. It was 1990. There was very few alternatives to Alcoholics Anonymous. I went to AA, met my wife there. I used it mainly for the fellowship. It's rather difficult to accept the AA program completely if you don't have a belief in the supernatural, in my case. But I used the fellowship extensively. I went out with guys for coffee after meetings and hung around and we talked and stuff. That's what I needed out of the AA program. And some basic principles. I mean, AA's been around a long time. They've developed some good conventional wisdom, okay? Little tricks like if you go into a party where there's alcohol being served, go late and leave early, and people never even notice. And you know, I got a lot of good from my association with AA. I'm not up here to throw any stones. People choose their own path. It sounds contradictory, but a lot of people go to AA and don't buy into the program. They're there for the fellowship and the mechanics of staying sober.
And my second question is about food. Do you consider food an addictive substance?
The addictive substance, no. But having said that, there are a good amount of people that exhibit addictive behavior in the food area. It's the behaviors that we're after. Not necessarily, we're not after the chemical and biological changes. It's the behaviors, it's the attitudes, okay? There's people who have just have a hard time with eating. There's various kinds of eating. Yeah, various kinds of eating disorders, and it's the behaviors that we're after, and the attitudes. Not, you know, it doesn't matter if it's officially an addiction.
Obviously, some eating behaviors, when you're really dealing with neurochemical processes in the body, from addictive substances, certain foods do produce dopamine responses, as do, and some people argue that sugar is as addictive as heroin. But obviously, you're really dealing with, first of all, an idea that I'm powerless over the drug. Obviously, on some level, people are powerless because they haven't acquired the tools yet that you're going to present them. So they feel powerless over an addiction without some kind of intervention or some kind of set of tools that you're prepared to give them. And so they acquire the tools in AA. Some people think it's their higher power, and I think that everybody has an internal higher power that ultimately they learn to access with whatever set of tools they acquire. Obviously, it's behavior, and changing behavior does change how people think for themselves in light of, especially you touched on neuroplasticity. And so if we can change our behavior, we can change how we think. We actually will change our brain apparatus and brain connections to move along the recovery and deal with things like our operant conditioning, the Pavlov response. You know, we have a cup of coffee, we need a cigarette. We've accomplished a piece of work, we get to reward ourselves with a cigarette or whatever else that we're using. That's where the urges are. And so if we can change the behavior, we can change. I'd really be interested in learning a bit more myself of all the tools that you have.
Well, if you want to come to the meeting, great. If not, I'll be happy to email with you.
Or meet sometime.
Sure, no problem.
I think we have time for one more back there.
How long do these meetings normally last?
I've rented the cell for an hour. That was a mistake. Most of our meetings go 90 minutes. I'm going to see if I can get an extra 30. If not, we can continue the meeting on the plaza here if somebody comes in after. Generally, they're an hour to an hour and a half.
Thank you, Pete. I think we all want to say that our program next week will feature Roy Foreman, remembering John Foreman, who passed away about a month or two ago. So the next week's meeting will be dedicated to a celebration of Joan Foreman's life. She was popular with many of those in the local community and is remembered by many as the co-founder of the New Dimensions Center for Mind, Body, and Spirit.